And a very good day to all of you from MSNBC World Headquarters here in New York. We're just about at high noon here in the East, 9 a.m. out west. Welcome, everyone, to Alex Witt Reports. We begin with President Biden, now officially 6 months into his tenure, hitting the campaign trail last night for the first time during his presidency, stumping for Virginia gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe. The president speaking on his efforts to curb the many crises that he has faced during the past 6 months, including the vaccine push and efforts to pass an infrastructure package, despite facing an uphill battle on both fronts.
I think the administration has a lot to be proud of. We vaccinated over 160 million Americans. We've created over 3 million new jobs, more than any administration has in the first 6 months in entire presidential history.
And the president even taking jabs at his predecessor, calling him out by name.
These off-year elections, the country's looking. This is a big deal. Terry and I share a lot in common. I ran against Donald Trump, and so is Terry. Look, it's not a Trump rally. Let him holler. No one's paying attention.
Of the Trump rally, the former president, is expected to speak today in Arizona, one of the swing states that in fact cost him the White House in November. And on the COVID watch this hour, we have NBC's Monica Alba joining us from the White House, Corey Coffin from Hudson, New York. Welcome, ladies, to you both. Monica, you first here, as we have President Biden reserving some of his strongest comments for the rise in COVID cases. What exactly did he say?
It's something, Alex, the White House is following very, very closely. Of course, the president just got a lengthy briefing from his COVID response team yesterday in the Oval Office. That was behind closed doors. But what we do know is that they're evaluating and weighing whether to change any recommendations or guidance when it comes to masking or social distancing. As of now, they say there's no intention to alter those, but that the science will really be the driver. So last night when he spoke in Virginia, the president did start by touting the success of vaccinations in the earlier part of this year. And he did highlight Virginia as an example and one state that really has done a good job of driving hospitalizations and deaths down. But he really did acknowledge that elsewhere in the country, it's become a huge problem, particularly because of the Delta variant. Take a listen to how he framed it.
Here's the point. Virtually all the COVID-19 deaths and hospitalizations are today among the unvaccinated people. And I know this has gotten a bit politicized, but I hope it's starting to change. It's not about red states or blue states or guys like that hollering. It's about life and it's about death.
The president was met with some protesters, which you may have heard there in the background, as he was stumping for former Governor Terry McAuliffe, who is running for that position again in November, Alex. But what really stood out to me were some comments he made about a different governor, a Republican one, Kay Ivey, who just over the last couple of days has really been talking about how low the vaccination rates are in her state and urged those Americans there who are sitting on the sidelines waiting to get their shots to do so. In fact, she was so exasperated, she said, I'm just not sure what else I can do to motivate this population. So the president said he applauded her, that more Republicans essentially need to come out and send this urgent message. And this is something, again, that's significant because in just the last couple of days, the president hasn't always been that precise in his language. At that town hall we saw earlier in Ohio, he seemed to imply that if you got the vaccinations, you won't get COVID and you don't need to worry. And we just know that's not the case, given breakthrough infection, something we've also pressed the White House to give us more details on, since we know there have been examples here on the campus, but they're still declining to say just how many White House officials that has affected since vaccinations really started to become available in January.
Yeah,
Alex.
but you know what you say about GOP and coming on board when you've got the likes of Representative Steve Scalise now, who just got his vaccination last weekend and is now touting the merits of it. You're right. There's a sea change out there for good reason. Okay, Monica, thank you so much. So the concerns go beyond the White House as the number of infections are spiking in every state. Let's go to my colleague, MSNBC's Corey Coffin, joining us from Hudson, New York. Corey, welcome to you. So what about health officials? What are they telling you there?
Yeah, there's this interesting thing happening, Alex, where you're starting to see a slight uptick in vaccinations in some of these states that have the lower vaccination populations because they're rising in the Delta variant cases and the surge of the cases. And that is translating into about a 14% increase in vaccinations nationwide, according to the White House. Some good news there, but the problem is the cases are still going up because the Delta variant is being driven by these largely unvaccinated communities. And of course, there's a lag in the data to see where we're going to be in 2 weeks. Nationally, according to Johns Hopkins University for today, we're up 65% over last week for new cases and up threefold over 2 weeks ago. 3 states are driving the majority of these cases. Florida, Texas, and Missouri now reporting some 40% of new cases. And, you know, we're talking about adults who have the choice to get the variant who are now saying, okay, we're starting to see this, my community be affected. I'll go ahead and get it even though I was hesitant before. But then there's that group under 12 who do not have the choice and who cannot get it. So it seems like we report every day, Alex, about the next camp or group of children that are seeing an infection. And I spoke with local county officials here about the latest outbreak here at one camp where 31 kids had to be sent home. That is leading to a lot of questions about in-person learning in the fall as well. Listen to what the county health director told me.
They feel like they're in limbo right now. They have some huge issues. Transportation. These school districts, rural school districts, can't go out and buy or acquire twice the number of buses that they have. And if they were going to socially distance kids on the bus, that's what they would have to do. So they're waiting for something from the state health department. And on that, lunches. You can't keep a mask on while you're eating lunch. And so last year the kids ate their lunch in the classroom, which is certainly they're ready to do that. We are concerned. The superintendent and I are concerned about the Delta variant. We are hearing stories out of England that it's kind of ripping through schools over there. And we are concerned about that when it comes to the fall.
Yeah, so Alex, these state and local health officials are in a very unique position to try to protect kids, but also wait for a vaccine to become available to them. And even as the death rate is expected to triple by October with this Delta variant, a new AP poll has some sobering numbers here. According to this AP poll, 45% of unvaccinated people say they definitely will not get the vaccine. 35% say they probably will not. And 64% say they have little to no faith that the vaccine will work on the variants, which health officials have confirmed that it does and is effective against. Alex?
It is extraordinary, those numbers, probably as a result of the misinformation that's out there, but thank you for trying to correct it. We're going to do that even further now. Thanks, Corey. Joining me is NBC News medical contributor Dr. Naheed Bhadelia, an infectious diseases physician and professor at Boston University School of Medicine. So, big welcome to you. You got to be frustrated by the continuing misinformation that's out there, but let's look at the rise in cases and what we know. It is primarily because of the low rate of vaccinations, but also the breakthrough cases. Let's talk about that. How surprised are you by those breakthrough cases?
Well, Alex, I'm not, because no vaccines are perfect, right? We knew even from trials that you get very high protection from hospitalizations and deaths, but you may still get infections. And in most cases, those might be mild or asymptomatic infections. The difference, though, is that Delta is so much more transmissible. So it may, and then there's new data coming out from Israel that I think needs to be validated. It's from a small study that shows that even though that, protection against a severe disease is still there. And you can see that in our numbers, right? Majority of the burden for hospitalizations and deaths is still being carried by unvaccinated. You may see increased breakthroughs, some of which might be mildly symptomatic among people who are vaccinated. So what does that say? It actually says we need to vaccinate more people, because if everybody in your community was vaccinated, you will see those cases start to go down, because vaccinated are less likely to get infected, less likely to transmit, less likely to get sick. And the other difference is, in the interim, it tells me that we don't have enough people vaccinated, and we need to think about layering those mitigations, particularly in areas where there's under-vaccination, because deaths went up. Alex, deaths went up again. Yeah. At this point, year and a half down the road, 30% increase in deaths in this country, and that is a self-inflicted wound. And in those areas that are highly affected, they should consider reinstituting indoor mask mandates, although it's unclear with the politics that will happen, and to surge those areas with increased testing so that we can control that transmission even more. We got to go back to what we know works until we can get those vaccination levels up in those under-vaccinated states.
Okay, so those that have been vaccinated, let's look at the two new studies this week that looked at the efficacy of Pfizer and J&J against the Delta variant. 2 shots of the Pfizer vaccine appear to be very protective against the variant. J&J appears to offer somewhat less protection. It has been suggested, doctor, that anyone who got a J&J vaccine, they may need to get an mRNA dose as a booster. Do you agree with that? And what do you say to the millions who took the one-and-done J&J vaccine if they're worried?
Well, Alex, I think even there, right, I think the protection against hospitalizations and deaths does seem to hold out, even in Johnson & Johnson. But there is a conversation, mechanistically in infectious diseases, we know that if you give people another challenge, a second dose, it tends to strengthen the longevity of the memory, the immune memory that they have. And so with this increasing data, I do think that CDC needs to comment on this. The data is a lot more clear. And what I'm hearing from the chatter is that particularly for people who are immunocompromised, in those cases, there should be potentially change in guidance coming soon about a second dose that we'll have to see. And that's really the group that I'm most concerned about right now are people who never mounted an immune response to vaccines to make sure that they get a boost or another dose that allows them to bring that up. I think that there's enough evidence that we should now get more input from FDA and CDC to suggest, what's needed until we can pass that. And it should come before the fall, before we start seeing more of the cases go up because of the Delta variant and the weather.
Okay. Dr. Nahid Bhadillia, thank you so much. Very comprehensive there. We'll see you again soon. Well, for all of you, we played some of what the president said at that rally in Virginia, but there's a lot more, including something he described as a Republican fog. Details on what exactly he meant next. A big week coming up on Capitol Hill as Tuesday will be the first hearing in the Select Committee's investigation into the January 6th insurrection. It comes as new reporting shows Speaker Nancy Pelosi is mulling whether to add more Republicans who were critical of Trump to that committee after vetoing 2 of Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's picks. One of those names being thrown around, Congressman Adam Kinzinger. And joining me now, NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, welcome. So first question, what should we expect with the hearing this week? And then what is the likelihood that we're going to see Speaker Pelosi appoint Kinzinger or someone similar in his beliefs to that committee?
Hey, Alex. Firstly, it remains up in the air whether or not Speaker Pelosi will add another Republican to that currently 8-member committee. All eyes here are on Adam Kinzinger because apart from Liz Cheney, the Republican who is already on that panel, he's the only member of that party who voted to even create this committee. He's been an outspoken critic of his party's leadership and its handling of the January 6th riot, as well as former President Trump, and he would really be the only candidate, probably the only candidate who would be interested in that. Now, the committee is poised to have its first hearing on Tuesday. It's called the Law Enforcement Experience. They will hear directly from police officers from the Capitol Police and D.C. Metro Police who are tasked with defending this Capitol from those rioters. In addition to that, President Biden yesterday mentioned the January 6th committee when he was across the river in Virginia campaigning for Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic candidate for governor. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Listen, think about it. Turn on the television every day and seeing the replay what happened on January 6th and saying, I was told there were a lot of peaceful, wonderful people. God, no, I really mean to think about it. It is bizarre. We have to keep cutting through the Republican fog that government is the problem and show that we, the people, are the solution.
Now, a little bit of a dig there at his former rival, Donald Trump, who has not yet accepted that he lost that 2020 election. And that part about the fog at the end, making government work and conveying to the people that government can work, that ties into everything Democrats are trying to do here on Capitol Hill, from President Biden's aggressive economic agenda to the January 6th committee, where they are attempting to show the country a version of events that can be trusted and that can cut through the kind of lies and disinformation that have plagued this entire conversation. Alex?
Interesting. Okay, Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much for that. We're going to pick up where we left off now. Joining me, Texas Congressman Mark Vesey, a Democratic member of the House Armed Services and Energy and Commerce Committees. He is also co-chair of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus. Welcome, my friend. It's good to see you again. So, first question to you. Why not add Adam Kinzinger to the January 6th Select Committee? I mean, wouldn't it help refute any future claims of partisan findings by adding another Republican to that group?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kinzinger would be great if Kinzinger were at it. We're on on energy and commerce together. He's a very thoughtful person. We don't agree on a lot of issues, but he takes his duty. He takes his patriotic duty seriously, and I think that he would be thorough. And that's what we need. We need for the American public to be presented with all the facts and for there to be some conclusions about what happened on January the 6th. And it has to be credible. And individuals like Banks and Jim Jordan that want to go up there and racially bait and be silly and with conspiracy theories and what have you would not give us the closure and the answers that we need about what happened on January the 6th.
Mm-hmm. Kevin McCarthy is not ruling out booting Liz Cheney from the Armed Services Committee, which you also serve on. Cheney's refused to step down from the 1-6 panel after being the sole Republican at this point appointed by Speaker Pelosi. So what would be the point of taking her off the Armed Services Committee?
Yeah, it would be ridiculous to take her off the Armed Services Committee. I serve on that committee with Representative Cheney. Again, we don't agree on a lot, but we actually have worked together on some armed services issues. And again, she's a very thoughtful person. And for a party that literally lectured the American public all last year about censorship and the First Amendment, why would you remove someone from a committee that simply doesn't agree with you? It's very un-American. She should be able to stay on the committee, and she should be able to be a part of the investigation on what happened on January the 6th again. So Republicans, independents, liberals, Democrats can have some closure and some conclusive, real facts about by insurgents.
Can I ask you how much you think other Democrats feel the same way that you do right now, that they want some Republicans on? And when I say Republicans, I mean true Republicans, that you can work with people who understand facts and truth. You just can't work with people who are in, to quote the president, a Republican fog.
No, absolutely. We want this to be something that all Americans can have faith in. We want all Americans to see Democrats and Republicans on this panel asking real questions, not being sensational or silly like oftentimes you'll see Jordan do, and how you see Banks when he says, a lot of the issues, particularly things that Banks says around race. Like, that's not what people need. This was very violent. I mean, Alex, think about it. We still have Capitol Hill police officers that are dealing with the psychological scars and pains of what happened on January the 6th. It would be a slap in their face to put clowns on the committee that aren't going to really thoroughly vet all of this information out and find out what happened. We had pipe bombs that were placed in places that we all walk by every day when we're walking back and forth from Capitol Hill and back to the House office buildings, at the DNC headquarters and at the RNC Club. Both of those buildings. Every day we all walk by those.
How much
so
does
many
that
people
haunt
could have
you?
been hurt, maimed, or killed.
Can I ask how much that haunts you, and the fact that we have the Capitol fencing down, and that, you need more money to build up the kind of protection potentially that you need to avoid a repeat performance of January 6th under whatever circumstances? How much are you haunted by that when you walk into your office at work?
Yeah, no, it's very sobering to think about the fact that as a matter of fact, I was walking just right by the RNC Club near the Cannon House office building the other day, and it just hit me. It's very sobering to think that someone put a pipe bomb there that could have hit any one of us had we been walking by at the wrong time, had it not been discovered. But what's really more of an insult, and what I think should be even more sobering to all Americans, regardless of their political affiliation or their race or their demographics, is the fact that we have Republicans that are still trying to downplay this, saying, oh, they were walking through the halls peacefully. It really wasn't that big of a deal. It's being blown out of proportion. When you can see those videos of policemen being dragged and sprayed with Bear pepper spray. It's ridiculous. And the fact that people want to be in denial about what happened on January the 6th should be something that I think is even more concerning.
Those that articulate that, I mean, they're just defying logic and truth. But let's move on and talk about the House Democrats from your state of Texas. As you know, they've been meeting with several members of Congress in Washington. The reason you know it is because they've met with you, too. They've left the state to block restrictive voting measures from being passed. You're a former state representative there in Texas. So what is going on in that body, and will it work?
I got to tell you, I think that these are the truest Texas heroes that we have seen in a long time. The state representatives, the state senators that are here in Washington, D.C., making a case, trying to make to let the American public know that in Texas, we need help. Of course, we need to pass H.R. 1, but in Texas and in Florida and in Georgia and North Carolina, we need the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Restore the Voting Rights Act bill to be passed so we can have some protection when it comes to these type of bills that are being passed and when it comes to the upcoming redistricting, to make sure that voters of color don't get completely run over in form and fashion like we haven't seen since the 1960s, Alex. If we don't get this passed, and the fact that they're here and they're shining a light on this, I think that is great. It's letting the American public know how and important it is that we get this legislation passed, because it would stop a lot of this nonsense. The reason why the Republicans are doing this is because they feel that they have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court and that it's open season on Black and Hispanic voters. That is why they're doing this now, which is why we need to pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. And again, particularly H.R. 4, because we need protection. We need pre-clearance back in the state of Texas and in other old southern states to stop these sort of things from happening. This is just the beginning, and I want people to know that. They're going to continue to push the envelope more and more. At first it was voter ID, and now it's this ridiculous bill that allows people to use their cell phones to record other individuals while they're voting, and to allow judges to overturn elections like we live in some place like Cuba. It's absolutely ridiculous what's happening in Texas and in Georgia and these other states, and we need legislation to help these brave individuals that came from Texas to D.C. so they can have some support, because they're not going to get it from the Speaker of the House in Texas, and they're certainly not going to get it from our governor, who has a huge football problem on his hands right now.
Well, thankfully, this has become a national conversation. I'm glad you've been part of it with me today. Congressman Mark Vesey, thank you so much. Prepare yourself for another onslaught of election falsehoods from Donald Trump, but can Nancy Pelosi force him to testify about January 6th? Congressman Ro Khanna wants the House Select Committee to force Donald Trump to testify on what he was doing that day and for his role in what happened. Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg. Hey, Chuck, good to have you here. Let's get right into this. What are the rules for calling a former president to testify? Are there any legal hurdles for Congress in doing that?
Well, there's really two paths, Alex. I mean, and I think both of them strike me as somewhere between impossible and unlikely. Path number one, the former president could consent and just show up and testify, as any other citizen could do. But as you know, he hadn't shown very much inclination for cooperating with any inquiry when he was president. I don't think that will change. And path number two, they could try and subpoena him and compel him. But I imagine that would end up in court. The president would invoke some sort of claim that he's privileged not to appear. And you know, too, from past experience, these things get tied up in court for a very long time. So I don't imagine that we will see him testify, whether it's consent or compelled.
But let me ask you about the privilege not to appear. That might apply to a sitting president, but he's a private citizen now. How would that argument hold any water?
Well, there's a big difference between a meritorious suit and a suit, right? So you can file anything in court and get a hearing and get a ruling. It doesn't mean you're going to win. It doesn't mean it's legitimate. But that said, a former president still, I would imagine, has privilege about some conversations and some things that happened during his tenure. I also think, and this is a really interesting question, What the Biden administration, what the Biden Justice Department would do on that question strikes me as very important. Look, all presidents, not just Trump, but all presidents have an interest in maintaining a privilege. And so does the Biden Justice Department take an institutional perspective, Alex, and argue on behalf of the privilege, or do they try and argue that the president, as you point out, former president, no longer has one? I think it's the former, that some privilege will last even though he's no longer in office.
Interesting. Let's turn now to the discussion around Trump ally Tom Barrack, who's out, as you know, on a $250 million bond ahead of the arraignment on Monday. The charges are those of acting as an agent of the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and obstructing justice. He's expected to plead not guilty. But this is one of the biggest bail deals ever. What did you make of this amount, $250 million?
It's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money for a couple of reasons. One is that, as I understand it, Mr. Barrack holds a foreign passport. He's a wealthy man with access to his own plane. So if he wanted to take off, it wouldn't be that hard to do. It certainly would be harder for you and me than it would be for him, Alex, although I can't imagine that either of us are going to flee the country anytime soon. And so they set the bail pretty high. And that makes sense to me. He now has to appear in federal court in Brooklyn, New York, where he will face charges on being an unregistered agent of a foreign government, and as you pointed out, obstruction of justice and lying to FBI agents.
But look, if he's a guy that can afford to post a $250 million bail, maybe he's a guy that could afford to lose it. I mean, I don't know his finances, but they're certainly significant. Why even grant him bail in the first place if he's that much of a flight risk?
Yeah, good question. You'd have to look at the statute, and the statute on bail in the federal system has a predisposition to being released, right? If a judge under the law can set a condition or a combination of conditions that will reasonably assure the appearance of a defendant at a subsequent hearing, that's the language of the statute, then they have to find a way to do it. In other words, there's a preference against holding someone in detention pending trial. It happens, of course, particularly in violent crimes, but in this case, where he has no criminal record and where the sentencing guidelines, if convicted, would be relatively low, I don't think any judge would be inclined to hold him. So you set the bond high at $250 million, and you hope that he shows up.
The fact that he's been released, significantly speaking, could it be a potential opportunity for him to work with prosecutors relative to Donald Trump and what he knows about his actions?
Yeah, so another good question, Alex. Whether released or not before trial, lots of folks who are facing the potential of going to jail want to cooperate. Most do. Whether or not he has something on Mr. Trump is a completely different question than whether or not he might want to cooperate and lower the risk that he spends any time at all in jail. I read the indictment, Alex. There's nothing in there that suggests that Trump was part of this scheme. That said, he could be part of some other scheme. We don't know. And that's something that prosecutors and agents would want to ask Mr. Barrack if they have the opportunity to do so.
Okay, Chuck Rosenberg, I love asking you questions, my friend, that's for sure. Thank you so much. So there were two moments this week that you must hear to get a sense of where Republicans stand on COVID-19, the vaccine and masks, and science. And at once, it may be surprising or not surprising at all. We'll go to it next.
I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function.
So
let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
Okay, someone got schooled there in that heated exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci this week after the Republican senator accused Fauci of lying to Congress about the role the National Institutes of Health played in funding research in Wuhan, China. Just the latest example of the deepening divide between science and politics on Capitol Hill. Joining me now is Zerlina Maxwell, Director of Progressive Programming at SiriusXM and host of the show Zerlina on Peacock, and Kurt Bardella, USA Today contributor and Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee advisor. Hi, guys. Did I get it right, Zerlina? Did he get schooled? Did Senator Paul get schooled by Anthony Fauci? And was he just trying to score political points by disrespecting the medical community?
Well, I think that the right wing has made Dr. Fauci into a boogeyman, Alex, and I feel like finally Dr. Fauci had an opportunity to say what I think a lot of us have been thinking when we watch these exchanges between Dr. Fauci and Senator Rand Paul, who is an ophthalmologist but does not know what he is talking about when it comes to COVID-19, Alex. And I think that what you're seeing in this week is the Republicans turning a little bit towards the science and deciding that perhaps they don't want their own voters to get sick and seriously ill and pass away. And so, to quote my favorite singer, JoJo, it's a little too late, but I am glad that Dr. Fauci was able to say that as clearly as he did, because Senator Rand Paul has a problem with bad faith, Alex. That was a completely bad faith argument he was making, and it was completely unnecessary and not based in fact.
You know, this week we saw a growing number of top Republicans begin to urge their GOP supporters to get vaccinated. That includes Mitch McConnell and Steve Scalise. Scalise, by the way, who got his vaccine. It's marking a notable shift away from anti-vaccine conspiracies that have been prevalent in the party's messaging. But why now, Kurt? I mean, to quote Zerlina's favorite singer there, JoJo, is it too little too late?
Well, I think that it might be in that I think it's very tough to undo months and months and months of politicizing science and then try to undo all of that with just 1 week of a few statements. I mean, what we've seen from Republicans and from conservative right-wing propagandist media from the onset of the COVID virus to the development of the vaccine to the distribution of the vaccine has been a nonstop chorus of don't trust the science, don't trust the facts, give airtime and give amplification to conspiracy theories, and you just can't undo that with the snap of a finger. You can't spend month after month after month telling your audience one thing and then expect them on the turn of a dime to change their mind just because you finally woke up and realized, as Zerlina said, it turns out owning the libs at the expense of killing your voters isn't really a good strategy in the long term. And you look at the states that are being hit from this the hardest, states like Alabama and Missouri and Oklahoma and Mississippi, all these anti-vax, high-wire Trump cultist states, and they're the ones that are seeing the big death. Was it 99% of people who have died right now of COVID have died because they aren't vaccinated? And the story is all the same. In every news story that we see, it's the victim lying there in the hospital, helpless, wishing that they had listened to the science and then dying. It's like, of course they're going to start now trying to convince everybody. They're going to try to convince everybody that, oh, we're for vaccines now, and none of this is our fault. That's the misdirection that they're doing.
So Zerlina, despite the description here that Kurt is very aptly providing for us, not all Republicans are changing their tune. You've got some that are still doubling down on vaccine misinformation. Punchbowl News reported that a roundup of House Republicans who are stoking fears about the vaccine, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert at CPAC in Dallas said, don't come knocking on my door with your Fauci ouchie. You leave us the hell alone. I mean, and you look at the rest there. It's not accurate, Zerlina, but why do this? Aren't they just putting their own supporters, their own constituents, to Kurt's point, in even more danger?
Yes, they're putting their constituents in more danger, Alex, but I think what their constituents should pay attention to here is that what these Republicans are doing, they're putting their own re-elections over people's lives. And so they don't care. The Lauren Boeberts of the world and the Marsha Blackburns of the world, they think that their own re-election prospects are more important than, let's be frank about it, Alex, children's lives. Because as Kurt pointed out, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated right now, and Dr. Walensky made that point this week. You know who's unvaccinated in the United States? Any child under 12. And so it's up to us adults to do the responsible thing here and get the vaccines.
Yep.
And these Congress people, you know what? I don't know how they sleep at night, honestly, because a 5-year-old died in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district this week, Alex, of COVID-19. And so I hope that she sees that little boy's face at night when she's misleading the public, along with her Republican colleagues, about the science.
You mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let's take a listen to something that she said earlier this week. Here it is.
Have you yourself gotten vaccinated, and do you disagree with the Republican whip?
Well, your first question is a violation of my HIPAA rights. You see, with HIPAA rights, we don't have to reveal our medical records, and that also involves our vaccine records.
A reporter there asking, says that asking a lawmaker their vaccination status is in fact not a HIPAA violation. So Greene either does not understand what HIPAA actually covers, or she's openly lying about the applicability of federal law because she does not want to say whether or not she is vaccinated. Thoughts on that, Kurt?
I mean, it's just this do as I say, not as I do. Listen, almost every single person who's out there in the right-wing sphere, poo-pooing on vaccines. I almost cursed there, so that's the only word I can come up with. But they are vaccinated. Like, don't be fooled. The Sean Hannitys, the Tucker Carlsons, all the Republican members, they are vaccinated. They just don't want to admit to it because it would reveal that everything that they're doing and everything that they're saying is a con. They are conning their supporters, their voters, and they are trying to monetize it and gain power and gain political power and get, as Zerlina said, and get reelected. That's what this is all about. That's what this has always been about. And people like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're engaging in a form of really healthcare domestic terrorism at this point because they are leaving the most vulnerable, the most exposed to something that is going to kill them. And it's sad that the last thought that so many of these people are going to have when they're lying on their deathbed is, gee, I can't believe I fell for that.
You know, I appreciate the fact you're trying to put logic behind this. I still don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. But anyways, Zerlina and Kurt, you guys usually do, so thank you so much. No, you always do. Corrected myself. You always do. Thank you. See you next week.